So like many of you, I was super inspired by those early images of bikes with bike packing bags. They promised that you could travel fast and light and really explore some unexplored terrain. So if you're a shorter person, then this probably looks fairly familiar to you. You got a brand new bike packing bag, you put it on your bike, and you notice that it barely clears your rear tire, if at all. So another big issue that comes up is the frame bag. Smaller bikes have smaller spaces inside the frame, and the size bags for these areas is almost comical. So what is a shorter person who wants to get into bike packing to do? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, this is the home of non-competitive cycling. So if you like to ride party pace and live the supple life you have found your people, hit that subscribe button. So let me start by saying that I am short, but definitely not the shortest person out there. I'm 5'9" with a 29-inch inseam, and I usually straddle somewhere between a small and medium-sized frame. I'm right at that cusp where rear saddlebags just barely start to rub on my tire. So if you're shorter than me or much shorter than me, then you definitely feel my pain. So what are your options if you want to go bike packing but are vertically challenged? One thing that many people do and many people suggest is to just use a backpack. It's pretty straightforward, but to be honest, it's not my favorite solution because that's why I'm on a bike. I want the bike to carry the gear and not my back. Otherwise, I would just go backpacking. Another thing lots of people suggest is just to carry less stuff. While that's certainly an option, it's definitely more of a challenge, especially if someone is new to the outdoors, bike touring, bike packing, backpacking, etc. There's just a natural tendency when you're starting out to carry a little bit more than you need as a safety net. So depending on your personality or your level of experience, that may or may not be a viable option. Another thing that people suggest is to buy ultralight gear, which is awesome, but also very expensive and not beginner friendly. And even if you pack less and have ultralight gear, there is still the problem of bags rubbing your rear tire. What are your options? So the first thing I would suggest is to look very carefully at the shape of bike packing bag. Although they may look very similar, they're definitely not the same. And what you want, especially if you're a shorter person, is to look for bike packing bags where the rear saddlebag slants upwards. Ortlieb does a fairly good job at this. This is the medium size Ortlieb seat bag, and it actually slants further upwards than the larger Ortlieb bag that I just showed you. Whatever you do, don't get a bike packing bag where they show you the picture and the bag shoots out horizontally, because the second you hit a bump, that thing's gonna just slap your tire. Another great example of a seat bag that has a fairly aggressive upward slant are the seat bags by Outer Shell Adventure. Yes, both these options are definitely on the expensive side, but there's a lot of thought that goes into the design and the materials, and that's why they cost so much. So again, you can see if my finger here is the seat post, the general trajectory of the bag is upwards and outward. Another thing that you want to look for are saddlebags that have a fair amount of stiffener on the bottom. So you can actually hear this one. There's a pretty rigid lining in this one, so this really prevents the bag from sagging and really maintains the small clearance that you may have if you are a shorter person. Not all bags are this rigid. It's extra material and adds to the cost, and that is one downside of cheaper, inexpensive bike packing bags, is that they tend to be a little bit floopier and floppier, and they don't take into account the small details like angling the bag upward to get more tire clearance. So Ortlieb is better than most, I feel like, and so is Outer Shell. Again, there is a point, if you're really short, that neither of these bags will work just because you don't have that saddle to tire clearance. We'll talk about what you can do a little bit later. For me, my personal preference is to use some kind of bag support, and I've almost exclusively migrated to these Paradise style seat bags. In comparison to bike packing bags, they have more volume, they can be more easily expanded, they've got exterior pockets so you're not just jamming things in there, and it basically makes the best use of what limited room I do have. Because I am on the shorter side, I often have to combine these style bags with some kind of support. This is the Erlen rack by our friend at Ocean Air Cycles. It clamps to your seat post and adds support to those Paradise style bags. You don't need to use this one specifically. There are many options out there like the Nitto R10, or you can just use a rear rack and not put any panniers on it and just use it as a support for a saddlebag. So that brings us to our next option, almost full circle, and that is considering a rack and pannier system. No, it's not as sleek or Instagram worthy as a full-on svelte bike packing setup, but it is super functional and practical. Personally, I've toured a ton using a rack and pannier system on paved roads and gravel roads. Not so much on single track. That's where I think bike packing bags do have a true advantage. But if you're going to be riding mostly paved and a lot of the grab, there's nothing wrong with a rack and pannier. Yes, it's a good idea to check on the bolts, once in a while, but it's not like the second you go on rough pavement, the rack will just explode. Let's not forget, a lot of people were riding on rough terrain with bicycles on even narrower tires using racks and bags and Paradise style bags way before the current iteration of bike packing has blown up. One downside of panniers is they tend to have more volume and you will tend to fill it. Nature abhors a vacuum and also empty space in your pannier. You will just find reasons and things to stuff in those spaces. But knowing that, you can help yourself out by using smaller size pannier. A great option are these ones by Revelate. These are their kind of bike packing style panniers. Definitely panniers on a diet. You can't overstuff these. These will force you to be light, which in turn will reduce the wear on your rack when you go off-road. As you can see, these are a kind of a one-piece design. They traverse over the rear rack, and there's no hooks or plastic buckles. It straps onto your rack with a series of straps. This sticks fairly close to the bike packing ethos in that it uses soft straps to attach to your bike or rack. This means that it's at least theoretically easier to repair if you've got a needle and some thread. There's no specialized hardware to break or crack, and because you can snug it down fairly tight to your rack, using the straps, it will rattle less. So Revelate's a great option. Another great option are these panniers by North Street. This is another small maker based in Portland. And again, it's got a super simple design, hook and bungee. I actually prefer this system on rough terrain just because the bungee keeps everything in tension and the bags will rattle less and are less likely to accidentally pop off. I know that's probably not the answer that some of you wanted to hear, but at a certain point, if you are short enough, no rear bag will work on your bike. And you'll have to start looking at a rack and pannier system. But I know what you're gonna say, but Russ, I've got a mountain bike, the bike doesn't have eyelets for a rack. What do I do if I want to put a rack on the bike with front suspension? Well, that's gonna be the topic of the next video in this series, and we're gonna look specifically at racks for bikes that weren't designed to take racks. I'm going to look at two options. One are the racks by the brand Old Man Mountain. These are super herky, made in the US, and the way that they attach to your bike is through the quick release or through the through axle. I'm also going to take a look at this option by Thule. This is a tour rack. This has its own advantages because it uses a ratcheting strap system that attaches to either your front fork or your rear seat stay. Not as much weight capacity, but a little bit easier to move from rear to front. You can do that with the Old Man Mountain, but that requires a slight change of hardware. But this is rated for a ton more weight. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. Be sure to subscribe so you can see how these two racks attach to your bike and what their relative strengths and weaknesses are. If you dug this video and found it informative or entertaining, consider supporting the channel by buying some merch, joining us on Patreon, all that good stuff, and as always, keep the supple side down.